All right, welcome, hello everyone and welcome to probably the millionth Dune film video that is on YouTube. So hopefully we will provide some insight and some fresh commentary on the film. But before we get into any sort of discussion, I wanted to introduce my cohorts, co-panelists, whatever you want to call them. They might be familiar to you because we actually discussed The Green Knight over on Philip's channel maybe a month ago, 2 months ago. Time flies when you're having fun.
Sure.
But I will go ahead and let them introduce themselves. Johanna, do you want to go ahead and start?
Hi, my name is Johanna from the channel Johanna, and my channel is basically a booktube channel. I mostly focus on fantasy and sci-fi. I do read other genres as well, but right now it's been mostly focused on fantasy and sci-fi, and I love Dune, so I am so excited to talk about this adaptation.
Go ahead, Philip.
Okay. Oh, I'm next. Okay. So hello, everyone. I'm Philip Chase, and I also have a booktube channel that is mine is focused pretty much on fantasy. Although I made an exception for Dune, although it's very fantasy friendly. I think Dune is. So, but yeah, I'll just say science fiction. The one science fiction work that I've so far talked about on my channel, I think. So, but yeah, I love the book and I'm excited to talk about the film with the three of you.
And I'm John. I'm the only one here who does not have a channel, but if you hang out with the Library of Alexandria's Discord, you probably see me in there. And I was on talking about The Green Knight a couple months ago, which was great. And I'm really excited to talk about this movie because I was really looking forward to it for a few years since they announced it.
Yeah, I guess that's a good way to start this conversation. Is this movie has been anticipated for a number of years. It was delayed and then delayed again, and then now it's finally out. So now that we've all seen it, what were your expectations going into the film? Whether it be, I don't know, what you expected on screen or maybe comparisons to previous adaptations. Johanna?
All right, well, I'll go ahead and start then. I guess, I'm so bad about having very specific expectations. I did expect that this would be incredibly monumental because it is Dune. There have been a couple of adaptations before. They did delay the release 2 times, as you said. So therefore, I think my expectations were pretty high as far as the quality and the cinematography and the acting and everything. So I guess I did have pretty high expectations. I knew going into any film adaptation, I expect there are going to be changes from the book. And so I did expect that to be the case. That was not going to be a surprise to me if that was the case. So I guess that's about it as far as expectations for myself.
So I'll go next, I guess. It's interesting because I liked the book Dune. I read it about 30 years ago, and I was excited along with a lot of people when started hearing noise about the film being made. But I wasn't terribly knowledgeable about it. I'm not the kind of person who usually is like first in line at the movie theater. I'm the guy who rents the DVD from the library a year or two after everybody else has seen it. So, but I just kind of enjoyed hearing the buzz, and I heard, there are people like Mike from Mike's Book Reviews who talked about it a lot, and he had a high opinion about the director, Denis Villeneuve, and so I heard sort of secondhand a lot of things from various people on BookTube, and kind of got excited that way. And based on what I was hearing, I had heard that Villeneuve is a fan of the books, of Herbert's books, and so when you hear that sort of thing and the kind of films he makes, I guess I started to think this is probably going to be really good. Was what I was expecting, and I thought this was going to be I mean, you're not going to please every hardcore fan. In fact, I know that some hardcore fans are not going to be pleased with any adaptation of their beloved book. So that's just how it is. But he is a fan, and I think that makes a difference. It was like Peter Jackson making the Lord of the Rings films. He's a Lord of the Rings fan. So they're going to be very careful with their vision, and they're going to try their best to do something that is in some ways faithful to the story, although it's an adaptation, folks. So, there are going to be differences, of course. So, but I had overall pretty high expectations going in, I would say.
What about you, John?
So my expectations came from a completely different place. Dune was always something I was aware of growing up, but I had never read it, and I'd never watched any of the older adaptations. But my excitement, which was very high, came from the fact that Phil just mentioned Denis Villeneuve is probably my favorite director.
Wow.
So if he announces a movie, I'm going to go see it regardless of what it is. And I know a lot of people were excited that he was doing Dune because they read it, but I had never read it before. So I was already excited going into it. And then I did read the book last year. So that added to it a little bit, although I was a little lukewarm on the book at first. I think I needed to give it another go. But most of my excitement came from the fact that just he was making it. And I love the movies that he makes, the scale that he makes movies on, but still kind of gives it a more intimate touch, even though he is kind of like a blockbuster director at this point.
Yeah, Blade Runner 2049 was my introduction to his filmmaking. But then I fell in love with him as a director with Arrival, which is actually an adaptation of a short story by Ted Chiang. And then Sicario, fantastic film. So loving Dune as a series, having read it, when I was in high school, and rereading Dune 4 times in the last 3 years since high school. Dune is very close to my heart. And then having Arrival being my favorite film of all time, I had admittedly very high expectations going into the film. And I was very, very nervous. And yeah, I mean, we can go ahead and start getting into the actual film itself. By the way, I think it's implied, or it should be plain, that we're going to talk spoilers about the film and about the book itself. So if you haven't read the book, you probably are going to be spoiled for plot points that may or may not have shown up in the film itself, or may show up in the future. So with that, it starts off, I liked how Denis Villeneuve started off the film, giving you context of the world and of the universe within that Dune is within, and the kind of political and cultural aspects of Dune through this kind of the voiceover of Chaney. I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and I hope that it provided a little bit more context and understanding for anyone that may not have read the books. So what are your thoughts on how he started off the film? Maybe visually, or was it confusing for you, or did you like it, not like it?
No, I thought he did a good job too. I noticed there were sort of quote unquote info dumps here and there, and I didn't mind them at all. I thought they were very well done, just like that Chaney scene you were talking about. And there was kind of some scenes of Paul having that sort of virtual teacher scene. And I thought that those were helpful, especially for people who haven't read Dune. And I know a lot of people who are watching that movie have probably not read the book, I'm assuming. And I was curious about that since I watched it with my husband and he and I had both read the book. I did ask some family members over the weekend when I was traveling what they thought. And it was interesting to hear their perspective of things. It seemed like a lot of the world did seem to get translated pretty well through those, info dumps, for lack of a better word. Sorry, exposition points, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience because I did reread the book to join all the fun and to get ready for the film, and I reviewed the book and all that. And I went to the film with my wife and my daughter, and they had not read the book. So it was interesting because I was interested to see, kind of like you were asking a little bit, or what you were, maybe something you were implying in your question, which is do people who don't know the story, how is this going to work for them? So I was interested in their reaction as well as my own. And I was interested in how I think they spent more time in the beginning of the film kind of introducing us to the Atreides family, and more time on we're doing spoilers, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
okay, so we spent more time on Kaladin than the book does ever. I mean, we get, I think, mostly just flashbacks in the book, right, for Kaladin, whereas we actually spend time in the beginning of the film there. So that was interesting to me, and I thought that was a good choice, probably, in order to present the story to a more modern audience, because let's not forget the book was written in 1965, and these days I think people are very invested in character, so they want to know the characters, they want to know and I think that was a smart move on Villeneuve's part to spend some time letting us get to know the Atreides a bit before we get thrown onto Arrakis, so I liked what that was an innovation or part of the adaptation, and I ended up enjoying that, and I think it was helpful for people who aren't familiar with the story as well. So, and just introducing us to some key things, and yeah, clearly there was a need to do some info dumping, if that's I mean, that's the negative way to put it, I guess. Exposition, if we want to be a little more neutral, but I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in this science fiction story. I mean, there's a lot of concepts, and you have to know about the Bene Gesserit, and you need to know about the Spice Guild, and you need to know about the Emperor and the politics and the houses and all this and that. So there's a lot, and then when you consider all that, I think that they did a pretty good job of working things in a fairly unobtrusive way, I think. So yeah.
What about you, John?
Yeah, I think that having to do that heavy lifting at the beginning kind of was required, because a lot of Dune's meaning kind of lies in the details, I think. And if you went into this not knowing anything about it, it would be hard to grasp that if it was more subtle about it. So I think, doing the exposition, a lot of the exposition early was required to help build kind of the characters up, the different, families that play, the different planets and the different factions. But yeah, I think he did a good enough job of mixing up the exposition, whether it's maybe someone telling Paul something, or one of the ones that I liked was how he was like learning on his own with different like little video things he was watching, and that would explain something that was important. Yeah. So I think he did a good job. But it is required, I think, or else it might not have landed. And a lot of this movie's success going forward for the next part is getting casual people to watch it. I mean, that's where you're going to get those bigger box office numbers, which obviously they've reached already to make a part two. But if they were only just appealing to book fans and being really subtle, I don't know if that would have happened.
Yeah, I appreciated the time on Kaladin and building up the world, and along with that, the focus on the relationship between Paul and Duke Leto, which you don't really see in the book. So I really appreciated that, and I liked the portrayal of Duke Leto in the film. They make him more human. That's probably the wrong word, but they make him more not endearing, but they make him more human, I guess, for lack of a better term. And I feel like the kind of focus that they went on with Paul is his relationships to his parents, including obviously Duke Leto. So I thought that was really nice and interesting.
Yeah. One thing that I think is interesting, though, about speaking of people who haven't seen or haven't read the book beforehand, I was super proud of my 12-year-old nephew, because he watched the movie Dune and begged his parents, my sister and brother-in-law, to buy him the book. Just begged them. He said, please, can I have that book? Can I have that book? I want to read Dune. I want to read Dune. So I think that the movie succeeded if it made a 12-year-old boy just want to read the book that badly. And of course, he is a huge Star Wars fan. So I think the book, I think the movie was successful in that way of explaining things, but also building some intrigue as well. So I just thought I'd add that.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was actually going to agree with you, Evie. And I was talking to AP Canavan about the film too, and I think we both came to the same conclusion that you did, which is about the humanizing. I think you said it perfectly, actually, the humanizing of the characters. Because my take on the book, and I love the book, so I hope no one hears this as derogatory in any way, but I think the characters are more archetypal in the book, and Villeneuve had to humanize them. And so he did things like that scene on Caladan with Paul and Leto at the grave site of the grandfather, right, who had died with getting bullfighting, right? So
Yep.
that scene where Leto never does this in the book, where he admits that when he was younger, he didn't want to be the next Duke either. And that's a very, very touching moment between the father and the son. And I think it builds our investment in these characters as people, helps them to be more relatable. Whereas the archetypal Duke Leto in the book is a much more remote figure. I think it's well done. He serves his archetypes are archetypes for a reason, right? I mean, they serve a purpose, and so he's a more of a remote patriarch in the book, whereas this fellow, he's vulnerable. This Duke Leto is far more vulnerable, I think, and human. So I absolutely agree with what you said.
Yeah, I think Villeneuve also had the challenge of finding a focus and an avenue for adaptation of a book that is really, at least for me, about the themes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was a good way of adapting the source material and having an anchor of sorts for viewers. But if we're going to talk,
sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that they did a good job humanizing him. I agree with that. I think that, for purposes of doing a film and trying to condense things, and I think, trying to condense a huge story like this in so many minutes, I think that they did have to kind of move a little faster in the development and kind of add some of that in. Whereas in the book, I feel like you do see some human moments with Leto. Like, for example, when the scene, I remember just that scene where he said, they tried to kill my son, and he's starting to lose it. And in the film, they show that sort of him getting more paranoid and Jessica saying, this isn't like you, you're not being yourself. So I kind of feel like it's interesting the way they did that in the film. I think that it sort of served, they did a good job of doing that because, like I said, they didn't have a lot of time in the film to do what they did in the book.
Yeah. Any thoughts on Leto, John? Or
I really liked him. I thought Oscar Isaac did a great job portraying him as like a man who kind of gives off a very big air of power, but also has kind of like a softer side. And you do see that with Paul, like, obviously at the gravesite was a very important scene. And I think that I think giving that kind of familial relationship is more relatable to people, especially to maybe someone who hasn't read it. I think they can relate to, that kind of father-son relationship.
Yeah. I will say that one of the aspects that I was a little disappointed in was in the changes of excluding the plot line of Jessica's betrayal, and because I think that plot line really added depth to their relationship, and so I kind of missed that in the film. But
yes, I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Where, I mean, it's interesting because I think a lot of some of the disagreement about the film seems to be centering around the character of Jessica and how she's portrayed. And I know that in the book, Jessica doesn't cry. She's a much more stoic figure in the book. And I'm open to various interpretations of this. Obviously, in the film, they have her weeping at several moments, and I think it goes back again to the idea of humanizing the characters, is that they were attempting to do that with her. And I'm not necessarily sure that crying is. I mean, our culture tends to interpret crying as a sign of weakness. We associate, I think, traditionally, and unfortunately, we have associated emotions like that as weak and feminine. And so I think that's probably where a lot of and understandably, I think a lot of people are saying, wait, you're taking a very strong female character and you're making her seem weaker here by having her more emotional. And so I understand that criticism. But I kind of think that if you think about it, does crying actually make you weak? Does it make you, or does it make her more human and relatable and strong in the sense that we see a woman here who is fearing for her son, like in the Gom Jabbar scene, right? So they give that recital of those that ritual, the Bene Gesserit, I forget the exact word, but it's about not fearing, right? The famous lines from
Litany against fear.
the litany against fear, exactly. And they put those words in her mouth instead of Paul's. So it's an interesting move, I think. But she's outside the room, knowing what's happening to Paul. And you see the mother in her obviously is absolute. I mean, the actress Rebecca Ferguson is just brilliant. However you might criticize this or not, or you don't like what they did with the character, I think she did a marvelous job with the acting. And so you see her vulnerability as a mother there, and she obviously cares deeply for her son, but she also obeys the Reverend Mother. And she's posted herself outside the door to not allow, and just like in the book, anyone in. So she's able to master all those emotions. She's able to master that fear and go forward. And if it's in a way, to be courageous and to be strong, you have to also be know what fear is, and you have to be vulnerable too, right? So I think that we could have an interesting argument about her character.
Yes.
Yeah. I admittedly, that is probably my biggest disappointment, to put it lightly, about the adaptation choices is the portrayal of Jessica. I can see the creative choices of why she was emotional in those scenes, because she's actually alone by herself. She's not showing that emotion to outwardly to anyone else. She is alone in those moments. But I guess again, that's kind of one of the drawbacks of an adaptation, is that in the book, in those moments where she is showing emotion, which is literally maybe 3 times,
Yeah.
It's much more powerful, because you don't see her expression emotion in the book, but you see it in the film. So for me, it kind of lessened the impact of when she was actually emotional, if that makes sense. But again, Rebecca Ferguson was great for acting with what she had. So I think.
So I'm sorry. So you're saying that like because they showed. Can you explain that again? I'm sorry. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So in the book, again, for me, I feel like the times that Jessica was showing emotion were so few and far between, that it made those moments more impactful. Whereas in the film, I feel like they were much more frequent, so you didn't get the emotional impact, or same emotional impact, or at least for me, as I did in the book. But however, I see the creative choice of keeping her alone. So, off the page of the book, I'm sure she had emotional moments by herself. So I see why they did that, but it did frustrate me a little bit.
I do have some thoughts on this, but I want to hear John's thoughts first.
I actually really like Jessica in this movie, but I also didn't really have like the book front of mind while I was watching. I was just watching the movie. And I do agree. I think Rebecca Ferguson is an incredible actress, and she was definitely like a standout for me. I think Denis Villeneuve clearly wanted more of the focus to be on Jessica with Paul versus Jessica with Leto. At least that's what I got from it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of her emotion, her more outward emotions, to me came from she's having this realization that she's kind of put Paul on this path, and I think she realizes that maybe she can't keep up with him anymore, or keep up with, you know, the path that he's going down. And I think she's kind of like scared for him in a lot of different ways. Obviously, during the test, he could literally die during that moment. But also, I think she realizes what she's been building him up for with his like Bene Gesserit training, that, you know, maybe she's creating something that she didn't even realize was possible.
Yeah.
So that's where I got her, a lot of her emotion from, was that she was, a lot of fear was coming from her, which is obviously a big theme of Dune. But
Yeah, I agree with that. And actually, I thought that actress was phenomenal. I thought she did such an incredible job showing you so much nuance, so much emotion without even speaking, like just visually. I felt like I was able to grasp so much of her internal state just from seeing her. So I thought she was incredible. I loved her in the film. I thought she was amazing. However, I do see, I think, what people are saying, and that is such an interesting point that you bring up, Evie, about how you see more frequent parts of her being emotional and vulnerable, whereas you don't see it as much in the book. So it's not going to have quite the same impact as it does in the book when she does break down. And so that is such a good point. And at the same time, it's like, how do you not show that? Like, for example, the scene with Paul in the room with the Reverend Mother. How do you show Jessica not? I don't know. Part of me is kind of understanding where the director is coming from and thinking maybe the director is successful in that sense because, one, like you said, Philip, like she is showing a sort of courage, a courageousness in her vulnerability and in what she's really having to put herself through that. And two, what John said, like you're actually able to empathize with what she's going through by seeing those sort of emotional beats. I think that where I see sort of the challenge for me with Jessica in the movie, and I don't know, this is just my interpretation. I don't think it's everybody's, but when I read the book, I think something that really struck me the second time I read the book was how powerful Jessica seemed to me in the first half of the book. And Paul was maybe not quite as powerful. Like he was still kind of in this sort of unknown, just knowing he had this terrible purpose, and unsure, not sure what that is, but kind of knowing he can't do anything. Like he has to just kind of go along with it. And then by the end of the book, it's sort of like you see a sort of switch where Jessica, it's not that she becomes weak. I don't want to use that word, but she has to let go. She has to, and that is its own sort of courage too, right? To allow her son to come into his own. And you see Paul sort of rise into himself and sort of take in more agency, I guess. And so that was something that I thought was very notable for me on my second read of Dune. That was kind of how I saw it. And I thought it was beautifully done. And it was just a beautiful portrayal of the mother-son relationship, especially as the son is coming of age. And in the movie, because we're seeing things, I think, a little more through Paul's perspective, it seems like maybe, and at the same time, kind of panning out to see some parts of Jessica that maybe we wouldn't normally see in the book, or that was a little closed off to us in the book. I didn't quite see that same kind of contrast in the movie. So I can kind of grasp what people mean by saying that Jessica maybe doesn't seem quite as powerful in the movie as she does in the book. I think it's kind of a combination of what all you all already said, but also just the sense that in the movie, I think it makes sense too. The director seemed to portray Paul in sort of a more powerful, or I don't know, he just seemed to be a little bit more on the other end of coming of age than he seemed to me in the book. But again, I think I'm going to attribute that to having fewer minutes to condense all of these things.
Kind of jumping to the end, but kind of related to that, and again, I can see why they made this choice. Jessica's saying, oh, we have to get Paul off the planet. We have to, get him to Caladan. But in the book, she knows he needs to take advantage of the Fremen, and their what is it, Lisan al Gaib, I think, prophecy and Messiah figure. But they took that away from her and gave it all to Paul, which again, probably it kind of frustrated me because I feel like it stripped away her agency a little bit. But I see why they did that, but I still didn't like it. So, but again, I liked Rebecca Ferguson's portrayal, like acting wise.
Yeah.
She really portrayed the stoic moments just beautifully, in my opinion. And her relationship with Helen, oh gosh, the Reverend Mother.
Right.
I thought that was simultaneously unnerving, but you could tell the respect that she had for her, but also the sense of being unnerved, not only for her son, but in that relationship there, I think.
Yeah.
But if you guys want to talk about the Gom Jabbar scene, I thought that was really well done, to put it into 5-second summary. What are your guys' thoughts?
I agree. It was really well done, and the part where just from the very beginning, and there are a lot of signals being sent in that scene. You have the moment where we're talking about Jessica and Paul, and when she's about to leave, she kind of reaches out as if she's trying to hug him or console him, and then that's the mother kind of instinct, I think, and then she puts her hand back down because she has to be a Bene Gesserit, and so you can see the conflict in that one gesture in her. It's so interesting how what can be conveyed by a good actor, a great actor, in a scene like that. And then with Paul and the Reverend Mother, the dynamic there was really, I mean, that is talk about an incredible actor. I don't remember her name, but the woman who portrays Reverend Mother is absolutely amazing. With her eyes and behind the veil too. I mean, she's veiled. I don't think that there's a veil in the book that's described that I remember. But anyway, you can't even see her face that well, but I still feel chills looking at this stern, severe woman who, probably reminds a lot of people of their most strict teacher in high school, or something like that. But yeah, I mean, she just, oozes authority, and but you can see as Paul's hand stays in there longer and longer, and he stops looking painful, and he looks more determined. Just the subtlest change in her eyes and the expression there, you can see this, like, oh, maybe there's something more to this kid than I thought. Maybe he is the Kwisatz Haderach. Is that what we're looking at here? And all that is conveyed non-verbally in that scene. It's just brilliant. I think it's just fantastic.
Yeah, and I think there was even a moment of fear for her as well. So.
Yeah, I loved it. I thought that the cinematography, even in that scene, the lighting, I went back to rewatch that scene because I just thought it was so well done. The tension in that scene, everything. I thought it was masterful. Yes.
Any thoughts, John?
Yeah, I just want to say before that there's actually a video on YouTube called Notes on a Scene, and it's Denis Villeneuve going through that exact scene and what his thought process was. And he actually mentions like why he veiled the Reverend Mother and all that stuff, and it's very, very interesting. But that scene was really good, and it actually had, I think, my favorite like individual moment of the entire movie in it. It actually has like a payoff from a minute or two before, when as soon as Paul walks in, the Reverend Mother says, I think she says defiance in the eyes, just like his mother or maybe his father. But that point that Philip mentioned, where Paul was in extreme pain and he was kind of struggling, and then he like looks up and he has this almost like terrifying look on his face of like defiance of, I'm not going to let this test beat me. I thought that scene was so good. Like that was Timothy Chalamet at his best, I think, in the entire movie. Which because he wasn't even saying anything, he just used like his facial expression to convey that kind of, okay, like this is obviously somebody more than just an arrogant young boy, and she saw that too, obviously, in him. But I thought that just that individual moment was really good.
Yeah, I liked his acting too, because especially that moment too, where after he takes his hand out and she said that if he had taken his hand out like an animal, I think is what she says, something along those lines, it like had the instincts of an animal, then they would have had to kill him. And the look on his face, like when she tells him that, it was just perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, to kind of segue, I was thinking of unnerving things and figures. The Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. You don't see him a lot in the film, but Stellan Skarsgård, I think his name is, I think was perfectly cast and made the Baron as villainous and disgusting as I imagined him. And I'm interested to see how they use his character in part 2, since you do see fairly little of him in part 1. I did like how they built up that relationship between Baron Harkonnen and Raban and Peter, the Mentat. So I liked that aspect of giving more meat and context to the other side, not just the Atreides, but the Harkonnens and then the Sardaukar by extension. So, which I thought was good. And visually, you kind of get a difference there because it's much more darker and stuff like that. So, any thoughts on those?
Have you all seen the 80s adaptation?
I have not.
I mean, I've sort of erased it from my memory.
I think I have too, actually. I saw it a little bit in high school and I thought it was terrible, but I did see a clip of that particular actor from that adaptation, and it is disgusting. I don't recommend watching it. It's so disgusting. I kind of liked this adaptation better. It didn't gross me out as much, but he is still very creepy, and it's interesting just how this floating, big, quiet, floating. I don't know. It was very weird.
I will say that I'm glad that it appears they took out all of the references to his sexuality. The fact that you could read the book and see a sort of, I don't know if he's even coded, but obviously he is in the book a pedophile, and I think a lot of people read him as a homosexual, and that somehow is related to his villainy. So I'm glad they took that out in this particular version of the film. And I was talking to AP about it in AP Canavan, and he mentioned how he was how Stellan Skarsgård was channeling Marlon Brando in Apocalypse Now, apparently. And I when I was talking to AP hadn't heard that before, and of course when he said it, it's pretty obvious. And then other viewers sort of confirmed, yeah, he actually did it on purpose. Like he was actually trying to kind of imitate what Marlon Brando was doing in Apocalypse Now, which I like that. I think it's kind of cool. I like that take on the Baron. So I thought he was sufficiently creepy. I wish they had done a little bit more to explain how he was floating, because somebody not familiar with the book would be like, how is that guy floating? I think at one point you did see a little device on his back or something. It was very subtle. So I wish they had taken some pains to at least sort of give us a little bit more of a peek at that, because it just looked like he was just somehow able to float,
Yeah.
So,
What about you, John?
Yeah, I really liked his design of just how nasty he looked. He almost reminded me of like Jabba the Hutt in like human form, like just like a big blob of like a human.
Yes.
They definitely didn't utilize him a ton. I think maybe setting up for a bigger, role in part 2. But I know the scene where he comes out of the oil bath was disgusting, and that was perfectly like encapsulate his character, I think, where he's just like a nasty guy, like supposed to be kind of like unsettling. And when he's like huddled up on the ceiling after he gets injured, like just like that was great. Great and gross.
The moment or the scene where he's eating a bunch of like fruit and vegetables, it kind of reminded me of Boromir's dad. I'm totally forgetting his name.
Oh yeah, like Return of the King.
There you go. Yeah, reminded me of him eating the tomatoes. Yeah. Huh. So I think that's partially why it unnerved me too, because that, I don't know why, but that kind of grosses me out in that scene in Lord of the Rings. But to kind of shift, but speaking of things that were left out, I know a lot of people, at least from what I've heard, seem to be frustrated that Fade was left out of this adaptation, and they're hoping that Fade would be in part 2. And I'm actually hoping that he's not going to be in part 2. I think they probably condensed Fade. I'm hoping that they condensed Fade and Rabban to one character, for the reasons that you mentioned, Philip, of eliminating that aspect of the Baron's character. And I did like what's his name? Oh gosh, who's in Blade Runner?
The wrestler guy who plays.
Yes,
Dave Bautista.
Yeah. Yes, Dave Bautista. I really liked his portrayal, even though you've seen for literally probably less than a minute. So I'm excited to see what he will do in part 2. To kind of skip ahead to hopes for part 2. I think they did a, for me, sufficient setup for creating tension between those two characters, and then later on, for me. Yeah. But the Sardaukar itself, I liked the changes that they used there. Instead of, I think they still mention it as a prison planet, if I recall correctly, but they portray it more of like a cult type planet rather than like a military kind of prison planet. And I thought that was interesting, that aspect of it. And I think it gave a lot more meat and context to the world, or that world specifically.
Yeah.
So, hoping they'll do a little bit more there, and it's also that everyone seems to be they're even more afraid of the Sardaukar, because when they come down and are taking over the Atreides, like even the Harkonnens kind of back up away to let them do their thing, unless I'm misremembering. It could be, but yeah, so.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Edie, by the way. I think in regard to Fade Rautha's absence, and I think you're right that they're condensing everything into Robin's character. And I would expect with they have some actors in the film who are definitely just draws, like Batista is one, and Jason Momoa is another one, where people like these actors because they're just a lot of fun, and I thought they played their roles really well. Jason Momoa, by the way, I thought was I know sometimes people sort of think he's been pigeonholed into a certain type of character, but boy, did he do a great job in this film. I thought, I really liked, he brought some depth, I think, to his role, and the relationship with Paul, as he was another mentor figure for Paul. And I was actually pretty touched by his character's arc here. And, from the moment when he sees Paul, I like that added scene where he hits him on the arm and says, "You've grown some muscle." And Paul says, "I did." And he's like, "No." I thought that was great. From there until the moment when he's defending them with his life and dying in the process. I thought that character was great, and just added another aspect to Paul's journey as well, for him to have these mentor figures who brought so much to him, and to see him losing some of them in such a brutal way. Just very effectively done, I thought. So, but yeah, I don't mind that they've condensed, and I understand the decision to the two, they're brothers, I think, anyway. Fade and Robin are brothers, I believe, right? In the book.
I think cousins.
Are they cousins? Like, they're both nephews anyway, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I think that makes sense, and I would not expect that character to appear in part 2 at all. I think Robin's going to have his part, and no spoilers for people who haven't read the entire book, I guess. But he's going to have his part in the book, I think. So
I think I saw online someone was like, put Fade in part 2 and Breenstein back as Fade. And I'm like, all right, well, okay.
yeah, I don't think so.
I wouldn't complain, but it's fine.
So any thoughts on that, John?
Yeah, I think it was pretty clear that Denis knew what he wanted to focus on for part 1 and what he wanted to just kind of introduce and then kind of place aside for maybe part 2. So I think maybe after part 2, if some of these things that, you know, you felt didn't get enough time, if they still didn't get enough time, that's when it would maybe be like an actual criticism. But I'm hoping that some of these things, like obviously Batista's character, even Baron Harkonnen himself, I mean, Chani's obviously a big one. You're hoping that they're going to have a very expanded role in part 2, and then that's going to really, I think, lend a lot of more context to why they were set up the way they were in part 1, which is kind of just introducing them, but not making them a huge focus for now, at least for now, hopefully.
Yeah, you kind of you get the backstory of Dune and the Fremen and the relationship and cultural and political relationships there at the start, but then you don't really get interactions with the Fremen until the very end, or at least the last probably 20-30 minutes. But the rest is focused on Paul and kind of the more house machinations there. But one character that I really, I think, kind of bridged the gap there in both the book and the film is Liet Kynes, and I really liked the portrayal of Liet Kynes.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people were like, "Oh my God, a woman! He's supposed to be a man." I think that gender had no directive on the character, I think, but and I really liked the portrayal of Liet Kynes there. I'm a little heartbroken that we didn't get the death scene, but with the hallucinations, but I will forgive them for that.
Yeah, I wondered about that too, because I felt like that had some good foreshadowing in the series too, that scene in the book.
Yeah.
I thought the actress did a wonderful job, so I'm totally with you. I'm surprised anybody has been complaining about that.
Yeah, I thought it was a brilliant choice for the casting, and I wish I could remember the actor's name, but she was perfect. And I actually felt more, and this is again going back to, I think, what we were talking about in the beginning, how I think Villeneuve is trying to to humanize these characters for us. And I really felt for Kynes in this film. The dilemma that she's in is pretty tough, because she's supposed to be this impartial judge, and yet she knows that the Atreides are being set up here, and but she's also got to protect the people that she's with. She regards herself as Fremen first and foremost, and so she has these different conflicting loyalties, and ultimately decides to put herself at risk by helping the Atreides, and it proves to be a fatal decision, unfortunately. But she, I think, I just felt for this character, and you could, again, it's something you just see in the eyes sometimes, and that scene where Duke Leto is saying, I mean, look, when they come back from the failed the equipment breaks down and people almost die, and they have to pick them up in the ornithopters and get the heck out of there. And he's kind of yelling at her. You can see we've been set up here, and you can see, I mean, she says verbally, it could be just old equipment. That's how it is, But you can see in her eyes, she's also kind of thinking, yeah, you've been set up, and I feel really bad about this. But he wins her over, I think, by rescuing, as in the book, those people, and putting himself at risk in the process. And ultimately, she does make the decision to help them, and a very human decision that unfortunately gets her killed. But I thought that was a great choice, and the actor did a tremendous job there.
Yeah, I agree. I think everything you said, Philip, and I think that character or that actress did such an amazing job of showing hints of compassion, but without being overly sentimental. And I don't know, she just knew how to sort of play that subtlety very, very effectively. And even though we didn't get the death scene that we have in the book, which was really great in the book, I still liked her death scene, honestly. I thought that the way she sort of willingly gives herself to the maker at the end was, I don't know, there was something, I don't know, I appreciated that part of her.
Plus, she did in the Sardaukar that had assassinated her simultaneously, so she didn't go down with a whimper, did she?
That's true.
Yeah, I think she, if I recall correctly, she gets stabbed in the back.
Yeah.
So I thought that was an interesting visual representation of, her literally getting stabbed in the back by the Empire. So, by someone she's supposed to be supporting. But do you have any thoughts, John, on that?
Yeah, I really liked her portrayal of Kynes. I thought that she did a really good job of showing her kind of having feet in both camps of, I kind of serve the Empire, but I also serve, the Fremen and their way of life. And then I'm also trying to help these people who are trying to defy the Empire and help the Fremen. So she definitely had this kind of conflicted look on her face a lot, which I think she portrayed really well, because she didn't really know where, I don't even think she knew towards the end where her loyalties exactly were lying at that point. But she definitely wanted to help Paul and Jessica, I think. So.
Now, did they? I can't recall exactly, but did they mention that Chani was the daughter of Liet Kynes in the film?
I don't think so.
Okay, spoiler alert for people that. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'd be interested if they continue that in part 2, if they put that correlation between the two characters. Because again, we didn't see a lot of Chani in the film, other than like the voiceovers and the visions themselves, which we haven't even gotten to yet, of how the visions were portrayed and the prescience aspect of it. So.
Yeah, her role was mostly, we see her in visions and dreams and that sort of thing. And when we finally meet her in person, it's kind of an iconic moment, I guess, especially for Paul. But you get the sense that she's going to have a much bigger role in part 2. So
the hope.
Yes,
I think I heard that she's supposed to get almost like POV parts in part 2.
Oh, great.
So I think that they were setting her up for like a bigger, obviously huge role in part 2.
Yeah, she sort of gets the last say in part 1, right? And she kind of she's talking to us, really. This is just the beginning, right? So hopefully that proves to be prophetic.
Yeah. But that segues back to prescience and prophecy and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on how the visions were portrayed? Because I was admittedly a little confused. I'm like, wait, what is going on here? And then I realized, oh gosh, these are visions. Why he keeps seeing this person. And then with the spice, the visual aspect of the spice hitting Paul. I know that would be difficult to portray with the prescience. But what are your thoughts on that? I know they did the his first vision when he's at the spice manufacturing thing,
right
he's kind of kneeling in front of there. in front of it, and he calls it grandfather.
Yeah.
So,
but they do a good job of showing how the spice triggers something in Paul, and that is related to these visions. And there's a moment in the tent with his mother as well, where he sees it kind of floating around. And so I think they do a good job of implying that visually, that there's a relationship here between the spice and Paul's visions, although he had been having these dreams even back on his home planet. So it's not entirely, maybe it's that it's unleashing them on another scale, I guess, the spices. But it's tough because there are a lot of things that are harder to do in films than in books, right? So the book has the epigraphs written by Princess Irulan, right? And how, I know the 1984 version, they have this like ghost large figure looming in the background, talking to us, this voiceover kind of thing. And now it looks kind of cheesy, but so they decided not to do that. They don't have the epigraphs, which has a lot of effects, because we learn a lot of things through those epigraphs. We learn that Yua, for example, is the traitor long before he does it, because of those epigraphs, right? In the film, doesn't have that. So if you didn't know that from the book, you might have, you wouldn't have seen maybe some aspects to that character, because those epigraphs are lacking. It's understandable, I think. The other thing that's missing is the what happens a lot in Dune is, in the book, you have a lot of inner thoughts, inner monologue, and it switches from character to character quite frequently. It's an omniscient narrator in the book. And I don't think there was a way for Villeneuve to really replicate that in a way in this particular film where it would come off as convincing. It would have been really tough to do, I think, to have, Paul staring at the camera and you hear his thoughts echoey kind of, I mean, it would just be so cheesy, I think. It'd be really tough to pull off. So instead, he got some great actors to convey stuff with a mere look, like we were saying, with, for example, Kynes, we could see the conflict just in her face, so I think he does a great job. He did a great job with the casting and got actors who sort of filled that void, because we don't have the inner monologue. So, but the same thing with the visions and the prophecies, and that's a tough thing to how are you going to do that exactly, in a film? So I thought they did a pretty good job with all that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the same thing, that because we weren't able to have epigraphs, and that would have been really cheesy to bring in a ghost Irulan.
Right.
It was very well portrayed visually through such great acting and subtlety. And of course, you can't get everything. There's still so much to Dune and to that world and to the philosophies that you don't really get in the movie. But I think it builds a lot of intrigue, and I think it's I think the acting really did kind of make up for a lot of it, for sure.
Yeah, I thought the visions were really cool. I mean, the scene where Paul has kind of his big vision and his big kind of breakdown in front of the spice manufacturer or whatever was pretty good. And then you also kind of get told by Paul after that he wasn't just having some kind of like a reaction. He was actually having like a very powerful vision at the time. That's what kind of like brought him to his knees. But I really like the way they showed it, and they're kind of confusing, and I think maybe deliberately confusing to kind of add some intrigue. I think the only vision that I didn't really understand was, I don't remember, what's the name of the character that he duels at the end?
Jamis.
Oh, Jamis.
Jamis. Yeah. So it seemed like a big vision, that there's a vision with Jamis, that Jamis tells him that he's going to teach Paul the ways of the desert. And I thought that was going to be like a setup for something, and then Jamis dies at the end. So I didn't really get what, I thought that was going to be like, maybe he was going to be standoffish towards Paul for a while, and then they were going to build a relationship. So I think the ending happened the way it did, I kind of confused it a little bit.
I think there are two possible interpretations of that, and they may actually even you can have both. One is that Paul sees visions of what could be, and there was another possibility, another world where he could have become friends with Jamis if it had panned out that way. The other thing, which I think is kind of cool, is that the vision told the truth, which is that Jamis became, in a way, the means through which Paul becomes one with the Fremen. He joins the Fremen as a result of that encounter with Jamis, who, by the way, in the film, it shows that they added the idea that he's the one that set off the thumper that distracted the worm, which had loomed up before Paul. Which that was a kind of cool moment too, and you're wondering what's that worm thinking there, you know? So I thought that was really cool. But anyway, I think that the idea could be, the way I sort of took it, was that I think Paul, in a sense, he shares in Jamis's essence. And there's the moment at the end of the fight when he has killed him and he's dying, and Paul comes and he holds his hand. And there's this sense of closeness, of empathy leaping out between them. And Paul feels this incredible, I think, overwhelming sense, a lot of different emotions at play there. Obviously, he feels terrible. It's the first person he's killed. But he feels this weird connection to this guy at the same time. And ultimately, you know, because water is so crucial here, sharing somebody's water, sharing their essence. So this idea of this greater connection to the community, to the people, something that might be conveyed through that vision as well. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well or not, but I thought it was really cool. I actually liked it, that he had that vision of a benevolent Jamis before he actually met the guy who turned out to be quite a bit grumpier. So
I like that interpretation because, it kind of leads me to a question too. But I just want to first say I really like that interpretation. I hadn't thought about that, but I also kind of wondered too, because in the book, doesn't he cries over Jamis's body?
Yes,
it's such a big deal that he gives water to the dead. And I was so surprised that wasn't in the film. I guess maybe they couldn't do that without expanding it and making it a lot longer at that point. I don't know. I'm curious to hear your all's thoughts about that. But I think what you said about that interpretation of seeing that other possible timeline could also lead to him crying over Jamis because he could see that potential path.
Yeah.
But anyway, any thoughts on that? Like him not giving water to the dead?
Yeah, I think so initially I was a little angry at the ending. I felt that it was rushed, and I'm like, he meets the Fremen and then immediately has a fight with Jamis, however you want to say it. And I'm like, but he builds a relationship with Jamis, and then he has to kill him, even though it's a relatively contentious relationship. But the more time that has passed since I've seen the film, and the more that I think about it, those visions are a means for Paul to kind of have built a relationship with Jamis, even though he hasn't physically met him. So he understands him, he knows him, so he can feel something for when he subsequently has to kill him. In regards to the tears aspect of it and crying over him, that's kind of aligns to my frustrations with the portrayal of Jessica, where the show of emotion is so infrequently done in the book because of and further emphasizes the importance of those emotions, i.e. tears, that it's how do I say this? I feel like I understand why they didn't do it in the film, why they didn't have him cry over Jamis, because they did kind of quicken the ending, so they weren't able to establish a traditional relationship between the two characters rather than Paul just seeing Jamis. So I understand why they did it. So it kind of takes away that thematic element from the book, but
yeah. I think that's what I think too, Evie. And I know it's also very different in the movie because Paul doesn't cry over his father for a long time in the book. Like he's wondering, like, why can't I cry? What's wrong with me? And I really liked that because I kind of felt like there was sort of like a passage in that sort of transition of him not being able to cry. And then when he does cry, and I can understand why that's not all in the movie too, but Yeah, I was a little disappointed about it at the same time, especially the part about him not crying over Jamis because it was such a big, important thing in the Fremen culture. So I guess like as far as moving forward into the second film, I'm really looking forward to seeing much more of the Fremen society and culture because that is so important to Dune.
What are your thoughts, John?
Yeah, I think maybe they didn't show the tears part, maybe because they're still building up the Fremen. And obviously, the big part of the Fremen is how much they value water because they live in the desert. And I don't think they really got into that as much in the movie. They kind of brought it up when they were talking about the still suits, but I think they just have a lot more to expand on with the Fremen culture that I think that they haven't spent enough time on yet. So maybe if they'd included that, it would have made sense to somebody to know, maybe, but without somebody having to maybe stand there and explain like what that means, like Stilgar maybe or something. But I think you'll just get more of that in part two.
Yeah, I mean they kind of go into it when Stilgar goes to Duke Leto and he spits.
Yeah.
And
and
everybody thinks that, oh, this is an insult, and you know, Duke Leto's guards are grabbing their weapons, and Duncan Idaho chimes in saying, nope, you gave freely of your body's water, and he spits on Leto's behalf essentially. So they kind of got into that a little bit. So
yeah, I think it's a missed opportunity actually, because Evie, I had the same idea that you did, which is, well, if they could have done that earlier thing with the spit, which I thought was great, and having Duncan Idaho, who probably should have mentioned that thing earlier. Yeah. But if they could include that and build up the concept that water is really important here, I don't see why they couldn't have had the tear, or the tears at that point in the film. Maybe they were just trying to get to the ending, and that's the only reason I can think. But I do think they still could have had a very impactful moment there, I think, with the tears. So I think it's a missed opportunity, perhaps. But
yeah, it's hard because sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say it's hard because there were a few things in the movie that I was a little disappointed not to see that were in the book. And at the same time, I felt like, but I can understand why. Like the other thing too, that was a little disappointing for me, and this relates back to not showing the whole betrayal with Yue and set up for everyone to suspect Jessica, was just how it turned out to be Leto who tells Jessica, my biggest regret is that I didn't marry you. I loved the part in the book when Paul tells Jessica that basically his dad always trusted her after he's dead, that he always trusted her, and his biggest regret was that he never married her. And that moment, it breaks her heart. That broke my heart when I read the book. I just felt it was all the more meaningful because Leto was already dead. But yeah, at the same time, like I understand the choice not to do all that. But man, that was like one of my favorite parts in the book. Like, and there were just so many little things like that that were my favorite parts in the book that I understand why it couldn't be in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Couldn't they have worked in one Balasset scene with Gurney Halleck, him playing that, right?
Yeah. Oh, I know. Yeah.
Although they turned it into like a bagpipe type thing, I feel like. I will say that I will say that they I feel like they, I don't want to say compensated, but they emphasized with the time spent on Caladan, like it's either raining or overcast. And I thought it was a good juxtaposition for when they got to Dune, to Arrakis. So I can see why they forwent the tears aspect of it, because you already had a very visual representation and difference between Caladan and Arrakis. But because you brought up Gurney, that's another thing that, because they kind of lessened / avoided the whole Jessica betrayal, I feel like we're not going to get the, spoiler alert for part 2, or at least the second half of Dune book, we're not going to be able to get that Gurney Jessica kind of forgiveness scene, for lack of a better.
Oh, that's so
which I thought
true.
was beautiful.
Yes, that's such a good point. I hadn't even thought about that. That's like one of the, see, that's another favorite part of the book for me. Wow.
It could still be worked in, actually, because we don't know at the end of part 1 what's happened to Gurney, and the plot to blame Jessica for the betrayal is still I think it could be an option. It could be, Vladimir Harkonnen, Machiavellian scheme could be worked in there still. I would love to see it because it is an iconic scene, absolutely. So, but yeah, odds are it won't be there, but it could be, I guess.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right, because I mean, as far as everyone knows, Leto and Jessica and Paul are the only ones that really know that about Yue. So we don't know what Gurney knows or doesn't know at this point. So
right.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, John? Excuse me.
The UA part is actually one of my 2 biggest, if I did have gripes. I felt that his little, his reveal didn't have any weight to it. Because in the book, you pretty much know that he's up to something because they give it to you in, like the epigraphs. But I think they tried maybe to convey that, where he would give like some little looks back when he was like leaving a room. But I just don't think that they had any build up to like his betrayal. So I mean, I know they had so many things to focus on, but just having a couple of scenes with him where he maybe was talking about his wife, talking about his family, looking regretful, looking like maybe he's about to have a breakdown, anything like that, I think would have helped that scene, because it's a scene with just him and Leto where he tells Leto why he did it, and it just felt like they kind of zoomed through that. I just didn't feel like the weight behind like that kind of twist, I guess, because you don't really know who it is in the movie, because they don't really tell you until right when it happens. So I thought they could have built that up a little bit more. I mean, obviously, it's a 2.5-hour movie. It would have been 4 hours if they had all the things in that we wanted. But, and then my other thing was, I agree with Evie that I thought the ending was very abrupt. I thought that the movie did a great job of taking its time the entire time, and then kind of rushed right through it, where he met the Fremen, and then they immediately have a duel, and then it's over in a couple minutes, and then the movie ends right after. So I thought maybe the duel could have been in part 2 maybe or something, but they did need kind of a climax. So I get why maybe they stuck it on the end like that, but it felt a little rushed when they had done a great job of taking their time, I think. So
yeah, I think that you're right. I think they could have maybe it might have been more ideal to end a little bit earlier, because I just it seemed to me in the book, I don't know if I'm imagining this now, but it seemed to me in the book there was a lot more time in the desert between Jessica and Paul. And I don't know if I'm imagining that, but it just seemed like there was a lot more fear and build up there with encountering the Maker, the Sandworm. That could have been a cool climax too, and end, but maybe not. I don't know. But what am I to say? I mean, I think they did a great job, though. It's still a very successful movie. So
there is also, I mean, I guess this is sort of a spoiler if you have not read the book, so warning. But there's a time jump too in the book that's close to where we leave off in the film, and I'm wondering if they're going to do that time jump or not. I think it's a couple of years. So that might be why they decided to stop right there as well.
Is that where the time jump occurs, though?
No, it's not precisely where it occurs, I don't think, but it's not that far off either. So I'm kind of wondering, is part 2 going to start, like, is Paul going to be like a couple years older, in part 2? Because there is that time jump in the book. It's a little bit later, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. Because
there still has to be a lot of, I guess, Bill, I would think a lot of, and I know that people think this is kind of rushed in the book maybe, but I don't know if that's true or not. But there still has to be kind of this sort of connection, the romantic connection between Chani and Paul.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we would lose
Let's
all
not
that if we
come
didn't.
together yet.
Yeah, that needs to happen, I think, too. Yeah.
Although, critiques of the book would say that it's kind of insta-lovey between Paul and Chani. So if there is a time jump and it's kind of, oh, they're in a relationship and all that stuff, I can see more detractors being frustrated with that. So I would hope that they would build up that relationship in the second part. So
Yeah.
Although
I think
if they do the time jump and they just skip to it, then they can avoid the insta love, I guess. So
yeah, I think it's going to be important though. I do like, even though that hasn't fully come together yet, I do like the buildup that's happening there between those two characters and with the visions and stuff. And I think the two actors have incredible chemistry. That's just my take with what little I've seen between the two. Yeah, I'm really excited to see what's to come with Chani. I personally really like Chani a lot. So
yeah, I think what Herbert, one of the things that Herbert does really well, in my opinion, is having really, really incredibly complex and strong female characters. And they did as well as they could with Jessica in this adaptation, even though I have my frustrations. And I think they did really well with Chani. She's wary and challenging of Paul in those few moments that they meet. So I'm excited to see where that portrayal will go in the second part. Because I thought Zendaya, I think that's her name.
yeah.
I thought her portrayal of Chani was really well done.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
But any thoughts, John?
Yeah, I mean, we only really know of Chani through Paul's mind, basically, except for the end. So we've only really we don't really know much about her, only besides what Paul basically like dreamt of her, I guess. I mean, we saw her at the end, and she was a little standoffish at first. Although she did give him, the knife as like kind of an honorific, which was nice. But yeah, I mean, I'm expecting a big expanded role, and hopefully a more like organic building of their relationship. I think that is going to be really important, central kind of to the main story of part 2. I hope it's not like the time jump happens and they're together. I don't think that would go over very well, at least to me.
Yeah. Well, we're almost to an hour and 20 minutes, so don't want to keep you guys all night long. Any like last minute thoughts that we haven't maybe talked about yet, or nothing?
I just want to know, Evie, and maybe everyone else, like, what did you think overall? Like, did you love this adaptation? Did it meet your expectations? I mean, I know we talked a lot about little critiques and things like that, but overall.
I think for me, overall, I think he did as well as he could. And knowing that Denis Villeneuve, he wasn't in it just to be like, oh, I'm directing Dune. It truly was he loved Dune as a work of literature. So there was a kind of passion behind it that I could tell. So I definitely appreciated Denis Villeneuve's vision and an adaptation from a fan perspective of the books. So from what I've heard, much better than David Lynch's. So what is it? Jodorowsky, apparently he had a vision of Dune that was never made. Heard great things about that. So
Yeah, to answer your question, Johanna, so speaking as somebody who's not like a real hardcore Dune fan, I've only read the first book, and I think it's a great book. And I would say that I like this adaptation a lot. I'm not. I can see where the real hardcore fans would be very nervous about anything like this, and then I think the risk is, of course, that everybody has their own vision, right, of the book, and if you're really wedded to, it was like that for Lord of the Rings. For me, I was very nervous because that was my favorite book, and when Peter Jackson was making the film, I thought, oh, they could never do this right. They could never do this right. And then when I saw the Fellowship of the Ring, I was like, oh, wow, they did it right. I thought it was great. I was hooked after the first 5 minutes. But I think there is a risk because we all have our own vision. And if you come into the film wanting your vision to be on the screen, you're going to be disappointed. This is one person's vision realized on the screen. And I think it's obvious that Villeneuve is a fan, as you said. I mean, he loves this story and he wanted to do it justice. And I believe he did, from my perspective. So I thought he did a great job overall.
Wonderful. What about you, John?
Yeah, I mean, I really liked it. This movie feels like a spectacle, and it feels very big, very grand, very epic. And I think that's part of Denis' style is he is kind of like he gets these huge budgets, and I think he just utilizes it so well. Like he uses every dollar he gets to putting more detail into his worlds, building his worlds. I mean, Dune's a huge, has a huge amount of world building you can do, and he put a lot of heavy lifting into that. I thought the costumes looked great, the worlds and everything looked lived in, and I think that I think he did a great job. I don't really envy him trying to adapt this because I think it is very hard. There's so many things you have to pick out of what is important to put into a movie and what you can leave out. And obviously, people who love the book, are gonna maybe pick that a little bit more. But I mean, I thought he did a great job. I mean, I don't know how he could have done better. He could have added stuff in, taken stuff out, but without making the movie, 4 or 5 hours long, he did the best he could, I thought. So I thought he was the best pick for the job to make an epic like that, because he is kind of an epic director. I mean, he mentioned Blade Runner. It gave me the same kind of feel of this like big epic spectacle kind of a movie, which he's so good at making. The score is really good. It had that kind of like tribal feel at times. I like that the drums, and there's always those parts where that girl was like screaming over the score. I know it was like, I think during maybe the Gom Jabbar there had that part. I thought that was like a nice little touch. Whoever was doing like the vocals for that was really good. So yeah, and then his cinematography is always, he always picks the best cinematographers, I think. So it looked really nice.
I will say that my husband, we buddy read before I even knew what buddy reading was, Dune, when I first reread it in preparation for the film when it was originally supposed to come out. And so we read it. He obviously loved rereading the book. And then we watched the film. And my husband is the type of person that if I watch the same film, within a 3-month time span, he thinks that's too often. But the day after we watched Dune, because we watched it at home on HBO Max, he told me, he's like, I think I want to watch Dune again this weekend. He thinks that I hate it. I'm like, no, I was a little disappointed. But he absolutely adores it. So I think actually I'll probably watch it this weekend with him. So especially after having this conversation, I think having different perspectives and thinking about it some more with your guys' perspectives in mind and thinking about how adaptations work, I think that'll give me hopefully more of a better appreciation of the adaptation, and I'll be less frustrated with the creative choices that were made, and I'll be able to appreciate it 110%. Which, not to say that I didn't appreciate it, because obviously I loved the film, despite my frustrations. But anyways, enough of my rambling. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me. If this is your 1,000,001 video of Dune, hopefully we provided some new information for you. I will put links to everybody's channel, obviously, down below, as well as I think the chat you did with AP was on your channel, Philip, or was it on?
Yes. Yeah. Well, we did a non-spoiler on my channel, and we're gonna have a spoiler on his channel. So yeah, we can go on and on and on. So yeah, but the one that's out is on my channel. Yeah.
Okay, I will definitely leave a link to that channel that video down below as well. And whenever the spoiler-free chat, I'll leave that link down below as well.
Okay.
With that said, maybe in a couple of years we'll reconvene for a part 2 discussion.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Yes. Thank you again, and have a great night.
Bye.